Hello class, this is CSE-4410, sections 1 and 2, week 7, spring 2025. Alright, so this is yet another bonus video in regards to some issues that had been brought up to my attention regarding the reactive target script, the event system, and the behavior of the enemy. So all of this is all revised code. So let's begin with the RayShooter script. So previously in the code for the RayShooter script, we had wrote a line of code that would broadcast to the world game event.enemy hit. So it's the player that is broadcasting the enemy hit event. There was one flaw with that, and that was we could just hit the enemy over and over and over again and inflate our score. Previously, I had written it so we would check whether there is a death animation playing already. So target.deathAnim, that's a handle to a coroutine that we check whether it's null or not, and if it's already null, we then broadcast our enemy hit event. And although this works, it is a little bit janky to program that way. So instead of the RayShooter script broadcasting the enemy hit event, it's the reactive target broadcasting the enemy hit event. So here are the changes. First, I previously had a field that looked like this. Yeah, I previously had a field that looked something like this. Yeah, I previously had a field that looks like this, where, well, technically this is a property, but whatever. I previously had a variable that looked like this, where we would get a reference to the currently running coroutine, and when the coroutine started to run, I would call start coroutine, and start coroutine returns an address to the coroutine that would start running. So it's also known as a handle. So this is a handle to the coroutine that we start here in this method, because this returns a coroutine data type that we can store as a handle. So that way we can, for example, determine whether or not we have a specific coroutine running. We would use that to our advantage to see whether we have an enemy that's already playing its death animation coroutine. If it's not, then we play messenger.broadcast game event.enemy hit. If this death animation is not null, then we don't broadcast again. So I wanted to clean up the code even more by, as I mentioned, I moved the broadcast, the messenger.broadcast, broadcasting the enemy hit event is now in the hands of the reactive target script. But I want it to run once. So much like how the wandering AI script was set up to be a two-state machine where it's either alive or not alive, the reactive target had to be programmed the same way. So private bool already hit, or it could just be called is alive or is already hit. I call it already hit. So this is a Boolean value that we set to false in the start method, and once we call reactive hit, we set that to true. So what will happen is this. Initially, already hit will be a Boolean variable set to false. When we call reactive hit for the very first time, this expression is going to evaluate to false, and we won't return from the reactive hit method right away. Rather, we're going to do all of this code. We're going to set already hit to true. We're going to broadcast to the world enemy hit. We're going to turn off the wandering AI if that's attached. We're going to turn off the smart movement if that's attached also. And we're going to turn off the fireball shooter if that's also attached. So if behavior does not equal null, behavior.setAlive false. If smart does not equal null, smart.change movement state, and then we passed in the paused state. If shooter does not equal null, then shooter.change firing state, and we set that one to false. And then we call the die method. We don't have to save a reference to that coroutine anymore. We don't need a coroutine handle anymore. So all of this code will be played once, because if this isn't already false, then all of this code will execute. Once we try to call it again after this has executed, it won't run again, because if already hit return, this will evaluate to true. The function, the method will return immediately. This is basically now a single-use function. So it will run once and only once. In other words, the effect of all of that is, if I hit an enemy, it will broadcast an enemy hit event. I get 1 point. But if I try to hit it again after the fact, I won't get any more points. Want to see? I only got 1 point. And I only got 1 point for that one. And I only got 1 point for that one. No matter how many times I click, once it's hit, it's hit. I cannot get any more points for that. And that is the biggest fix for our first-person shooter project here. One other fix that is also worth mentioning is the following. The particle system. So, after doing some thinking, and after this was brought up with a few students as well, the reactive target script, all it does is turn off whatever components are attached to our enemy, be it the wandering AI, or the smart movement, or the fireball shooter, or any combination of the three. Although the wandering AI is actually just a combined version of the smart movement and fireball shooter, so really it should be any combination of these two. But there is nothing stopping us from having even more components that we can turn on or off. So we could have yet another component, another script, that would turn on particles upon death. So really, this particle system here should be a part of its own script that we would turn on instead of turning off. But for the sake of simplicity, I opted to have the reactive target have a particle system anyway. So we attach a particle system to our game object, and the code should run regardless of whether we have a particle system attached to our game object. So that was yet one more bug that had to be fixed. Previously, I just left the code so we would turn on and off the particles regardless of whether there were any particles attached. So I just blindly said particles.enable emission equals false in the start method, and in the death animation coroutine, I had particles.enable emission equals true. That's not how it works. Because if I just left the code like this would turn off and on the particles, yeah, but what if there are no particles? If there is no particles, then we will be trying to turn on and off something that doesn't exist, and therefore, when you try to run this die coroutine, it would actually break. So, what would happen if you've probably seen in the past videos, I would hit the original enemy, it would fall over, but it wouldn't disappear, it wouldn't despawn. And that was the problem with leaving this code as it is. To fix that, we need to make sure our particles even exist in the first place. And if it does, then we turn it on or off. So, really the code should look like this. If particles does not equal null, then particle.enable initial equals true. Similarly, we did the same for this, turning off the particles if we even have particles to begin with. So, I'll just copy this code here. If particles does not equal null, particles.enable emission equals false. And that is what it takes to make sure that we turn on enough particles as long as they exist. So, if particles does not equal null, we set it to false. If particles does not equal null, we set it to true. That one's for the die coroutine, but the other one was for the start method. One other thing, you see these squiggly lines? Yeah, this field is deprecated, so we need to use something else instead. Here's what that something else looks like. So I have it in the die coroutine already, but I'll just copy paste it here. So particles.emission, that is a variable that is a part of the particle system. We write a new variable. We'll call it var because that's just a generic variable. It'll inherit whatever data type the right hand side is. So I say var emission equals particles.emission. That is an emission module. I just say var so that way it's easier to type, and var just inherits whatever, var just becomes whatever data type the right hand side is. So if I say var emission equals, if I say var variable equals vector 3, then the variable just becomes a vector 3. If I say var emission equals particles.emission, that becomes, the data type just becomes particle system.emission module. That might be a bit of a pain to type out, so it might be an advantage to just say var instead, and especially if you don't know what the data type even is. So var emission equals particles.emission, and then emission.enabled equals true. This was something that was brought to my attention by a student who apparently went ahead and bug fixed this. So I'm just gonna mention that right now. So that line of code that was previously particles.enable emission equals false or equals true, we replace it with two lines of code, var emission equals particles.emission, and then emission.enable equals true, or rather false if we are doing this in the start method. We would say equals true if we're doing this in the die coroutine. So that is the last fix. That's just to clean up some code that was long since deprecated. So wouldn't want to use something that is no longer intended to be used anymore. So those are all the fixes in the ReactiveTarget and RayShooter scripts. Moving the broadcast method from the RayShooter to the ReactiveTarget. Changing the ReactiveTarget to be a two-state machine, so when it dies once. So it was not enough to have the enemy. It was not enough for the ReactiveTarget to turn off the wandering AI. That is not enough. We need the ReactiveTarget to turn itself off too. But the end result of all those combined fixes is our enemies die once and give us 1 point once. And the original enemy is still around as well. So if I cheat a little bit here and grab the player is this Jeep here, but I have the original enemy over here too. So if I move over to where the original enemy is, if I can find it, the original enemy also has a ReactiveTarget component attached, but it has the wandering AI. It has no particles, and previously how I mentioned how if I shot it, it would fall over and be unable to despawn. With those fixes I mentioned, first I need to close that interface. So, with those fixes in place, it falls over and despawns on cue. I believe I got a point for that as well. So those were all the fixes we had to make sure our game works as expected. Like making sure everything works as expected and we don't have bugs where we inflate our score or have game objects spinning around. Making sure the things we hit in our game stay dead, basically. If it's dead, it stays dead. There we go. Alright, so if you want to take a good look at the code, here it is once more. This is the ReactiveTarget script as it stands in my in my project right now. So reactive target script in the start method. Okay, we have an already hit private bool. We set that to false in the start method. We also have a particles particle system that we want to have a reference to. Alternatively, we can have a script that we can call a method to turn it on, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to have a particle system as part of the reactive target. We turn off emission for that particle system in the start method also. We turn on particles in the die coroutine. In the reactive hit method, if the already hit is already true, return. Will not execute any of this code. If we do not have this already set to already hit, we'll execute all this code. We set already hit to true. We broadcast our enemy hit event. That gives the player 1 point for killing the enemy. We turn off the wandering AI if we have it. We turn off the smart movement script if we have it. We turn off the fireball shooter if we have it. And finally, we start the die coroutine for the enemy to play out its death animation. And there we go. All of that just to make sure our enemies die and stay dead. Okay? Alright. The only other change to the RayShooter script is just removing the line of code that said messenger.broadcast game event.enemy hit. All we need to do is call target.react-to-hit and all the code in the reactive target script. This method will handle everything for us. Broadcasting the death event, turning off all the other components attached to it, and then playing the death animation coroutine. And that's it. That's everything regarding the reactive target bug fixed. Okay? Alright. So that's going to be it for this bonus video, and if you have any questions regarding the midterm project, be sure to let me know. But I will make one final announcement regarding the midterm project as well. So be on the lookout for that announcement. It's just a reminder that we have to meet for both Monday and Tuesday if you're in section 1, or no, Monday and Wednesday if you're in section 1, Tuesday and Thursday if you're section 2. And finally, your presentation should not be in the Unity editor. Rather, you are to export your game. So you want to build your game. So build settings. For purposes, we're gonna make it a desktop game, and then you want to select build and run. I do have more instructions on that as well. I will be uploading that momentarily as well. So just instructions on how to export your game. Alright? Yeah, I'll have that information out momentarily. So that's gonna be it for this bonus video, and good luck on your midterm projects. Let's see what you've been able to come up with. Okay? Alright. Thank you. Bye.